My king has donkey ears. Frances Harbour, Marianne Kowalski. Imagine King Kyung Moon Wang's horror when he wakes up one morning to discover 2 long donkey ears growing from his head. He is a vain man with a terrible temper. Just how terrible the royal tailor discovers when he laughs out loud at his donkeyful master and is threatened with the royal head chopper. What can he do to keep the king's secret and his own head? My King Has Donkey Ears by Frances Harbour, illustrated by Marianne Kowalski. My king has donkey ears. King Kyung Moon Wang ruled in the days of old Korea. Although his kingdom was not large, he was a vain and imperious man. He loved to spend money on rich clothes and bright jewels, and delighted in showing off to his people. But he had a fierce temper. When he issued a royal command, he expected his subjects to obey at once, just because he was king and they were not. If anyone refused, he flew into a rage and summoned the royal head chopper, a fierce-looking man with a long, razor-sharp sword. Everyone was very careful to obey the king's royal commands. One morning when the king woke up and went, as usual, to admire himself in the mirror, he discovered 2 long donkey ears perched on the top of his head. For the first time in his life, the king could not stand the sight of himself. He pinched first one arm and then the other, hoping he was simply having a bad dream. But it was no dream. So he issued a royal command. "Donkey ears, be gone!" he commanded. But the donkey ears did not obey. King Kyung Moon Wang was furious. Just then the royal tailor appeared, carrying a fabulous new robe the king had ordered him to make. "Good morning, your majesty," he said, bowing low. When he stood back up, he noticed the strange ears on the king's head. He stared. "How beautiful you look today," he managed to say. Then he laughed out loud. Without thinking, he added, "And how donkeyful!" "What did you say?" roared the king. "Anyone who dares to laugh at me will not laugh for long, especially without a head." He reached for his gong to summon the royal head chopper. "Wait!" cried the tailor, desperately trying to think of a way out of his predicament. "If you will spare me my head, I will make your donkey ears disappear." Now it was the king's turn to laugh. "If I, a great king, cannot command these ears to go away, what can you, a simple tailor, do?" "Please, your majesty," begged the tailor. "If you do not call the head chopper, I'll be glad to show you. If you are not pleased, then you can have my head." Without a word, the king drew his hand back from the gong. Quickly the tailor pulled out his needle, thread and scissors, snipping a bit here and a bit there. He worked feverishly on the new robe he was still holding. His needle flashed, and in no time he was finished. "Allow me, your majesty." Carefully the tailor folded the donkey ears down. Then he wound a lovely turban around and around the king's head until the ears were completely covered. He added a few final stitches. Then he handed the king a mirror. "Now you are just as handsome as ever," he said. "No one will ever laugh at you because no one will ever know about your ears." King Kyung Moon Wang was pleased with what he saw in the mirror and with the tailor's plan. "Do you really think so, tailor?" He began to cheer up. "Of course, your majesty." While the king was busy admiring himself, the tailor picked up his scissors and thread. He was anxious to leave because he was having difficulty containing his laughter. He thought the vain and bad-tempered king richly deserved donkey years. He could not help grinning to himself as he bowed his way out the door. The king caught a glimpse of the tailor's mocking face in the mirror. "One moment, tailor!" he bawled. "In return for your help, I would like to give you something. A royal command. I, your king, command you never to tell a single soul about my ears." Then his voice turned soft and sweet. "You do know what happens to those who disobey a royal command." "Head chopper?" whispered the tailor. "Head chopper!" roared the king. After his day's work at the palace was finished, the tailor started off home. As he was passing through the busy marketplace, he started to think to himself, "My king has donkey ears. My king has silly-looking donkey ears on top of his silly royal head." The more he tried not to think about it, the more he thought about it, and the funnier it seemed. He could not help laughing. "Hey, tailor!" several onlookers said to him. "Something very funny must have happened at the palace today. Tell us the joke." "Yes, something very funny," agreed the tailor, wishing he could tell these people what had befallen their king. Indeed, he was just about to blurt it out when he happened to catch sight of a row of headless chickens hanging by their scrawny necks in a butcher's stall. Before the crowd could get another word from him, he scurried off. The onlookers scratched their heads and wondered. It was not like the tailor to keep royal gossip to himself. When the tailor reached his tiny cottage, his wife was waiting for him. "Good evening, husband. You are just in time for dinner," she said. The tailor removed his dusty slippers, placed them neatly by the door, and went in to make himself comfortable. He sat down on the floor in the warmest spot, and his wife brought him his dinner. Bowls brimming with fluffy white rice, steaming hot soup, and homemade kimchi. But as he started eating, a picture of the king's new ears popped into his mind, and began to shake with laughter. A big mouthful of rice flew at his wife. "Husband!" she cried. "Something very funny must have happened at the palace today." "Yes, and the more I think about it, the sillier it seems," the tailor chortled. He could hardly speak. He was laughing so hard. "You had better tell me before you laugh your head off," his wife said. Abruptly he stopped. "My head off? Oh dear," he moaned. And to keep his wife from asking any more questions, the tailor buried his face in a big bowl of rice and worked his chopsticks click, click, click as fast as he could. His wife marched angrily into the kitchen and banged things around. It was not like the tailor to keep a good joke to himself. Later that evening, a farmer who worked in the rice fields stopped by the tailor's cottage with a gift, a little jug of rice wine. The tailor welcomed his good friend, and together they sat quietly on the porch and watched the moon. "How lucky we are tonight," the farmer said softly. "See how beautiful the moon is, as round and as smooth as a face, and how pretty the clouds are beside it." The tailor had to agree that the moon did look like a face, almost like the king's face, and the clouds on each side rose from it like two long donkey ears. Suddenly he burst out laughing once again. He rolled off the porch and fell into the bushes. "Look at you!" cried the farmer. "Something very funny must have happened at the palace today." "Yes," answered the tailor, "and the more I think about it, the funnier it seems." "Really? Do tell me. I am dying to know." "Dying to know?" Instantly the tailor's laughter changed to gloomy silence, and he would say no more. The farmer looked unhappy. "Tailor, you and I have been friends since we were little boys. We have always shared our secrets. I am sorry to see that you do not trust me any more." The tailor did not like to hurt his friend's feelings, but he could not forget the royal command. So, to keep his friend from asking any more questions, he started to drink his wine, glug, 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 as fast as he could. Hurt, his friend picked up the jug and left for home. It was not like the tailor to keep secrets to himself. Soon the moon was high in the sky, and the tailor and his wife were fast asleep on their sleeping mat. While the wife softly snored, the tailor dreamed. There was a royal parade. Hundreds of people were crowding and pushing to catch a glimpse of His Royal Majesty in his brightly coloured robes. Then, just as the king was passing in front of the tailor, the stitches of his turban began to pop, one by one. Out sprang his donkey ears for all to see. How everyone laughed. A king with donkey ears? But it was not the crowd that was laughing. It was the tailor, laughing so hard that the covers were bouncing up and down on his belly, laughing so vigorously that he woke himself up, laughing so loudly that he had to stuff a pillow in his mouth to keep from waking his wife. "What's all the fuss about?" asked his wife drowsily. "And why are you eating a pillow?" "Shh! It was just a dream. Go back to sleep." He waited until he heard his wife snoring again, and then he crept quietly out of his cottage and into the night. "I have to let this secret out," he decided. "If I do not, sooner or later I'm going to explode." The tailor walked for a long time, not stopping until he came to a large bamboo grove far away from the village. Then he took a deep breath, opened his mouth and shouted at the top of his lungs, "My king has donkey ears! My king has donkey ears!" Over and over he shouted it, rolling on the ground and laughing so hard he thought he would choke. Finally he sat up. "What a relief! I feel so much better now," he said. He was just about to return home when he thought he heard a sound, a quiet whisper. "It's just the breeze," he said to himself. Or is it? When he listened carefully, the whisper became a soft chant. "My king has donkey ears! My king has donkey ears!" The bamboo plants had heard the secret, and their rustling leaves were passing it on. "Oh no!" cried the tailor. "The morning wind will blow the song all through the kingdom, and when the king hears it, he will lose his temper, and I will lose my head." On his way back to the village, the tailor wakened his friend the farmer, and when he had also roused his wife from sleep, he told them both the sad story. "So you see, dear wife, dear friend," he sobbed, "these are our last few hours together. In the morning my life will be over, for who can stop the wind?" "Husband, we cannot just wait for the king's head chopper to come knocking at our door. We must think of something," insisted his wife. The tailor snapped his fingers. "I have it!" he exclaimed. "We shall pull out all the bamboo plants." "Husband, there are thousands of plants. It would take weeks, and we have only hours." "You are right, good woman," sighed the farmer. Then he too snapped his fingers. "I know! Fire! Let us burn down the bamboo grove." The wife shook her head sadly. "Too dangerous," she said. "The fire might save my husband's head, but it would spread and destroy the villages and the farms." The tailor and the farmer were out of ideas. The tailor folded his hands over his face to hide his tears. "Husband," said his wife, "do not weep. There is more than one way to guard a secret." She brought him his sewing basket. "A hat saved your life once," she said. "Tonight you must make another, and it must be your best or it may be your last." She whispered her plan to him. "Now hurry, for time is precious." For the rest of the night, the tailor stitched bits of coloured silk together, making magnificent patterns. He threaded on bright beads and sparkling baubles until the hat glittered like a million stars. And all the time he sewed, the farmer cut stuffing from the sleeping mat, and his wife wrapped it into soft little bundles for her husband to tuck inside the lining of the hat. Just as the sun was peeping over the trees, the tailor snipped his last thread from his dazzling creation. "Quickly now, take it to the king," cried his wife. "May your feet carry you like the wings of a bird," cried his friend, "ahead of the morning wind." The tailor ran all the way to the palace and burst into the king's bedchamber. "Your Majesty!" he shouted, for there was no time to be polite. "Please wake up!" King Kyung Moon Wang stirred and rubbed his eyes. When he saw who it was, he became very angry. "Tailor, how dare you disturb my sleep? You have spoiled the most wonderful dream." He reached to sound the gong. "Forgive me," said the tailor breathlessly, "but look, I have made you another hat." Bowing low, he presented his creation to the king. One look at the magnificent hat and the king forgot all about the gong. He was ecstatic. Swiftly he tore off the turban and set the new hat on his head, neatly tucking in the donkey ears. Then he looked in the mirror. "How grand I am!" he cried. "With a hat like this I would not care if I had elephant ears. It is surely the most splendid hat in the whole world. I will wear it everywhere so my people can admire me. I will never take it off." These were the very words the tailor had hoped to hear. He bowed low, smiling to himself. By this time the morning wind had passed through the bamboo grove. It had picked up the little song and was busily spreading it through the kingdom. Everywhere, in the villages, in the marketplaces, in the rice fields, people were listening and laughing. Unaware, King Kyung Moon Wang gazed proudly at himself in the mirror. Finally, satisfied, he opened the window and looked out over his kingdom. In blew the fresh morning air, bearing its fateful message. The tailor froze and held his breath. But still the king smiled. "Tailor," he said, "I must surely be the greatest king that ever ruled Korea. Just see how happy my people are. Everybody is laughing." "Yes, your majesty." The tailor smiled too. "You are indeed the greatest, the kindest, the donkeyest king that ever ruled Korea." King Kyung Moon Wang turned slightly. "Did you say something, tailor?" From that day on, the tailor's wonderful hat never left the king's head. Because he never again heard anything that upset him, the king never again needed the gong or the head chopper. He issued no more royal commands. Whenever he paraded by in his beautiful clothes and his dazzling hat, the people laughed and cheered. "What a magnificent king he is!" they all said to each other.